As if the calamitous 14th century wasn't calamitous enough, with social, economic, political, and medicinal or medical issues and problems, huge challenges to all European states. There was one more central challenge, and that now will be in terms of religion. Recall that the process inside of the books that you've been reading is that the Christian movement has spread into Europe over a series of centuries and permeated outwards from various regions. There are still people in the 14th century, for example, who live in Europe who are still non-Christian. There are, of course, Muslim minorities and Christian minorities in various areas. There are also some pagan or non-Christian, non-Islamic, and non-Jewish people. In other words, Europe is still not exactly 100% anything in terms of its religiosity, but it's increasingly having that trend. Increasingly, the Roman Catholic Church, based out of the city of Rome, with the Pope acting as the vicar of Christ, or using the Petrine doctrine we talked about earlier, that they are the inheritors of the true Christian tradition. That is a very powerful idea in Western Europe, and essentially it means that the Pope is the head of the Church. End of story. As you saw, for example, with the Crusades and some of the other issues, the schism between the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Western European Church in 1049, the papacy has been taking on a role of increasingly controlling Christian thought and centralizing it in Rome, as if it was a sort of a worldwide controlling figure. Now, one of the central interests of that is then that Rome is the traditional home of the Bishop of Rome and the papacy and the core of the structure of the church. But what's going to happen is, in the end, there is a series of conflicts between the French king and the Bishop of Rome. His name is Boniface VIII. There's a military confrontation where the French king had sent some men after the Pope in terms of trying to essentially assault him. So there's some soap opera elements here, but nonetheless, the idea that the Bishop of Rome, in his authority over everything within the Christian church in Europe, that is much disputed by many. So that is going to be an issue for this time period that's coming. There are already many people who are disliking the centralized authority of the Bishop of Rome because it undermines their local authority back in their small kingdoms or countries or cities. The Bishop of Rome having all power is an idea, but it has not been actualized by everybody. It's not totally true. Now, starting by 1309, clearly what's going to happen is that the Bishop of Rome is no longer going to be in Rome. He's going to move to a city called Avignon, all right? And that is a city that is right near the border of the French kingdom in southern France. It's technically part of the Holy Roman Empire, but it's like a border city. And all of a sudden, now the French king has influenced the Bishop of Rome, and the Bishop of Rome, Boniface VIII, died soon after. There was huge political pressure brought to bear, and a French candidate was made the new Bishop of Rome, and then moved the papacy from the traditional base in Rome to the city of Avignon. And it's obvious that the French influence here is going to be very heavy. This is going to be a very powerful issue for the 14th century. On top of all the warfare, we now have an issue where what's called the Babylonian captivity is referred to. The papacy, which is supposed to be in Rome, is now sort of essentially been kidnapped and taken someplace else. And this idea of Babylonian captivity is in reference to the idea, remember, under the state of Judah had been conquered and the people there had been taken, the two tribes of Israel had been taken to Babylonia by Nebuchadnezzar. And of course, as we talked about earlier, Cyrus the Great had freed them and moved them back. This Babylonian captivity, that the true believers and the true thinkers have been kidnapped and are now somehow in Avignon, is very, very tricky for many people in Christendom to deal with. The idea of all the Christians together, it seems it's very silly. Why is the Bishop of Rome not living in Rome? All right. By the time period of the 1340s, it appears as if the papacy is planning on staying there. French popes only appoint French or French-minded cardinals who elect the pope. It looks as if the papacy is now going to be an extension of French power. But in 1378, after a lot of public pressure, many, many people asked the Pope of Avignon to go back and live in Rome again. And while he is there, he dies. And that means there's now going to be a new papal election. There is great pressure brought to bear by the people in Rome to have the papacy back in Rome. Not go back to Avignon in France or on the edge of France, but stay in Rome where it's supposed to be. The College of Cardinals, who elects now the Pope, is under great pressure. They select somebody who is an Italian, and he's going to have the papacy stay in Rome. So it looks as if this sort of kidnapping of the papacy to this other city, Avignon, is over. But not so fast. There are then allegations that the papacy had been the election had been conducted in such a manner that it was illegal. Many of the French cardinals leave Rome, go back to Avignon, and select another pope. So now, here's the issue. We have two popes in Europe, each claiming to be the true, the only. And in this map, it helps us break down some of the color coding. Let's think about this for a second. This is in the middle still of the 100 Years' War. You have the French fighting the English. So should we be shocked to learn that the English want to support the Pope in Rome, while the French and their allies want a Pope that is closer to their thinking and who lives in Avignon? In other words, there are two popes, and each political authority in Europe is essentially asked, which one should we follow? Okay? Saying that they're both of equal value, but what's also interesting is almost across the line. Everybody's who is at war or has an enemy, one side will choose one pope to follow, the other will choose the other side, and now this simply betrays the strict political nature of this whole thing. There is no dispute about theology here, nothing about interpreting the Bible differently. This is simply a man-made political problem where the church is being split into two pieces, and actually there'll be more popes later, but we'll talk about that in a second. But notice here, in this simple map in the color coding, there are, France is at war with England, and won't we be surprised if the English want to have their authority with the Bishop of Rome, and the French will have their authority be with the Pope in Avignon. All right? So what's happening here is that religion is being openly politicized. There are other issues involved here, but increasingly the papacy is seen as just another political actor that has to raise funds for churches and have infrastructure. And now there's two popes, each claiming that they're in charge, each claiming taxation benefits over the clergy and of other people, and in many ways it is becoming more difficult for people to think in terms of the bishops of Rome as true leaders because there's always another one. Another thing is happening, and this is one of the instances of, remember, many popular Christians, people who are living out in their individual parishes, when they hear that the popes and the leaders of the states are fighting each other, they don't see any clear understanding why this is an issue. It's about religion, it's about theology, it's about what's called popular piety. People's belief in the seven sacraments, the living of their lives, where many people's family structures are based on baptism, Christian baptism, on Christian marriage, on last rites for Christians as they die, for communion, the Eucharist. I mean, most people inside the churches are living popular piety. They're living their faith, and the political noise and the problems of the elite people fighting each other are extremely secondary to many people in that scenario. Take a look at this basic reading inside some of the chapters you're looking at. See that this is essentially a political problem that's not going to be solved, and it's not going to be solved until 1415 when they're going to come back together in a council and crash all the papacies back together. Okay, that's not going to happen though till 1415. While that's happening though, many people are creating their own kind of sense of personal piety and looking for their own sense of devotion inside of Europe, and they're not seeing it within some of the instructional structured elements of the church. So by 1415, at the Council of Constance, we're going to wipe out the different popes, get back to just having one, whose name is Martin, and he will go back to live in Rome, and that will reunify the church after this era of great embarrassment for all involved. Take a look at that inside your reading, and then see if there's any sample questions that can help you with this area.